Hi, ACES 102. Here's a primer as you enter into homework 2 this week. I think you should be getting used to the view in Compass 2G. First thing I always recommend is that you review the rubric. You can find it there. You're going to find various forms of this critical thinking rubric throughout the semester. This is version 1.2. While we're focusing on critical thinking, and that's why we're bringing in the systems thinking tools for you to help you with your critical thinking, this rubric will change slightly from assignment to assignment depending on what we want to focus on. I like to read it from the list view personally because you can toggle on and off the descriptions of each of the rubric areas with the detail. So do review these carefully as you start your assignment. And this week, I'm going to pay special notice to the evidence tab as you're developing your assignments, okay? So do focus on that. Now, here's the prompt. There are 3 primary steps for your assignment and 1 bonus. So I'm going to throw in a couple bonus points for you if you make a good chart for your homework. And there's several tips, so I do encourage you to read through all the tips. There's an example that's attached. Just like most of the attachments to assignments, you should find it just below the prompt. If you're wondering what a scholarly source is, here is a great resource provided from our library. A list of questions that helps you think through the quality of the source that you're dealing with and the type of argument that you're trying to make, to make sure that you're matching good quality sources for your information to your arguments. So I'd encourage everybody to review that as well. Now, in my case, as I was working through the 3 steps of the assignment, I decided to use the example that we built upon during class last Thursday. And in particular, I decided to focus on the rabbit reproduction problem. Okay? I think maybe a few of you even did this one in class, right? So, how do rabbit populations change over time? Now, so my performance indicator of interest is going to be rabbit population. How many rabbits do I have? I got a garden right over there. Is my garden overrun with rabbits? It has been in the past, and I do think about this. It's a complex system. Let's study it. Okay. Step 1 is come up with a hypothesis. Let me make sure you picked up on that. Pick a performance indicator and create a hypothetical chart, a hypothesis for how your performance indicator has changed over time. So that's step 1. Let me show you on my example. Here it is. Performance indicator, rabbit population in my backyard. There's the number of rabbits. And I would guess, I've lived here for several years. It was stable for a period of time until I had a vegetable garden. Once I put that vegetable garden, man, it was overrun with rabbits real quick. Eventually, I decided to put in a fence around my little garden. It's not a big garden, but it has a little fence. And that did manage to help, but I still had more rabbits even after the fence. My hypothesis, you'll notice, it's probably also important to make sure that you label your chart on the vertical. If I had actual numbers, I don't have real population numbers. I never took a rabbit census. But, it is probably worthwhile to say, it is low versus high. Okay? It is still worthwhile to think about it that way, just so you have some frame of reference. Any and all of this is what you're seeking to provide some better analysis on through the course of this particular assignment, okay? Step 2 is about using the literature, going to find out. In my case, I don't really have good literature talking about my specific garden, right? So I had to think about it a little bit critically. Here are some example questions, 1 through 3, of what you might want to consider when it comes to starting to really analyze your previous hypothesis. Okay? How high or low? How rapidly did it change? Or maybe what are some of the factors that led into some of that change? Okay? And I ended up choosing that 3rd case. You can see that here. What factors might have contributed. I found a source, and here's what I did. I started to annotate a little bit to try to say, well, based on what I learned from that Vandermeer paper, we know that really things don't change linearly. Rather, they're changing exponentially or logistically. I'll just show you briefly. Here's a quick view of the Vandermeer paper. It's a scholarly source. It's from the Knowledge Project from the Nature magazine. And it tells us a lot about the underlying principles of how populations change over time. And if you want to get to this article, you can click the link in the example later in order to see what this looks like, okay? So that's how you're starting to get to improving the quality of your hypotheses and testing your hypotheses. Once you have those two things put together, number one and number two, a hypothesis and some information, you write a short little essay. Write a short little essay. The very basic form of the essay, these are examples of that. We talked about them in class the other day. And here's mine. You know, before the vegetable garden came, the number of rabbits living near my home was stable. That's why I drew it like this. That's why I drew this line here like this. But let's see, I didn't want an arrow there. Sorry about that. I just wanted more of a line. But then like we discussed earlier, it started to increase. And decrease after the fence, right? So that's what I wanted to show. And if I want to try to explain this based on my source, you can say, well, all right, the rabbits, they do reproduce. But, you know, once I put a fence in the way, they weren't getting all the resources they needed, and they started to move away. And I even referred back to the Vandermeer paper in my thing. That's about 110 words, if I remember correctly. You can use up to 250. It's really not a whole lot, but that's what we're shooting for here. Okay? Read my example carefully when you get a chance. Now, finally, do draw a revised and updated hypothetical chart. Once you've learned a little bit, you should expect your perspective will change over time. So let's document that a little bit. I have that on the second page. Well, exponential growth looks more like this, and logistic death starts to look like this. We still currently hypothesize it was at some higher level. Okay. Now the last step is the bonus. You'll see there are 3 questions, just like in class the other day, to try to understand, start to summarize what are the influencing factors. Is there a loop here somewhere? What's the key stock? And you can, if you can get to it, sketch out your stock and flow diagram. We know there's a reinforcing loop here. So I'll make it, oops. Label that as such. And you can see the various influences on the diagram too. The size of the fence matters. The relative availability of gardens down the road, the size of my garden, we know that they will influence the flow through the various valves that fill up and empty this particular stock. Okay? So there's a review of the stock and flow assignment here for number 2, and you'll get some feel for how some of these resources do change over time, particularly now focusing on your particular assignment leading up to your documentary. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know. Both Bridget and I are going to be hosting office hours before